We're on. So yours, Steve.
Okay. I just posted a link to the meeting agenda and notes in the chat window. So for those where this is your first rodeo on attending a SIG, sometimes it's convenient to have that open. We've got a section for attendees to log in to add your name. So maybe if somebody says a comment, I find that it's useful to have those kind of names in there to look up people's affiliation and figure out who they are. We're going to start here with an update on the KubeCon event, which starts next week. It's a great session. It's in Copenhagen this year, so I realize not everybody can make it, but I think a fair number of people in this SIG are going to make it from what I've seen. And I just wanted to highlight a few events going on there. First of all, there is a pre-event day of using Kubernetes with VMware infrastructure. It's optional, and you do have to register for it. I think it's a $25 contribution that ends up going to the CNCF Scholarship Fund as a charity. We've got a number of sessions there on that are linked in the agenda, so I'm not going to read them all, but there is one in particular. This VMware SIG is going to have a face-to-face meeting there. So if anybody is in town in Copenhagen and wants to get to know people personally, I invite you to show up at that session. Fabio and I will both be there. And I think we're going to have a presentation on the cloud provider and maybe some other things. We're still working on that deck at this moment. There's a session that looked really interesting if you're on the dev side. I think members of this SIG are in two camps, users and developers who are actually working on the Kubernetes code base. Tim Pepper has a session that looked really interesting to me that covers how you get involved with Kubernetes as a project. And I think for people who've new to open source in particular, who are, their background is principally commercial product, but there's a lot to be learned in that session.
I appreciate the shout out, and I'll give a slightly broader shout out too. There's basically a whole track of new contributor information. So for new folks, there's a lot of opportunity to figure out how to orient and engage.
Yeah. And then the other one that caught my eye and the deck's already published and it looked great was Michael Gash's presentation on Kubernetes resource management. I learned a lot just looking at the slide deck, so that one looks really good. Anyway, if you want to learn more, go look at the agenda notes doc, and there are links to those sessions in the doc itself. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Fabio to cover the status of the active projects relating to this SIG. Fabio?
All right. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to take a look at a few of the updates I have for this week. All right, let's see if I can manage to get this shared. All right. So I don't have many updates for this week, but I have a couple of interesting things. So first of all, we are working with the rest of the CNCF cross-cloud project to get some hardware, some VMware hardware to run cross-cloud CI, which means that we're going to have a dedicated CI system that will show up in this dashboard you can see here. So we're going to have continuous integration jobs running on VMware platform, so we can continuously test both the last Kubernetes release and also the version that sits on master. So we're going to have continuous test for not just Kubernetes, but all the CNCF projects you guys see here. So we're making an investment on this, which is hopefully going to improve the stability of the cloud provider itself for vSphere platforms.
Now, this would run the whole test suite or only cloud provider specific ones, Fabio?
This is going to be the entire test suite. So all the, it's going to be, obviously it's going to be run with, with the cloud provider. for vSphere. So we're gonna test, the platform itself, but the entire suite is gonna run. This is kind of a big deal. It's been in the works for now a couple of months by now. So it's we're getting there. We got the capacity provision.
Is there any word on what Kubernetes distribution might be running for this test case? I know there's a number of them including just taking plain vanilla Kubernetes as if it was stood up on bare metal and putting it on VMware infrastructure. But there are people who would potentially use PKS, OpenShift, or maybe other distributions as well. Are we going to pick one?
So this is specifically for Kubernetes. So we're not testing any specific feature of any distro.
Okay.
This project here is created by CNCF, and there's a link at the bottom here that will bring you to the CrossCloud CI repo, where there's a lot of information how the actual tests are run. There's also a way to go check. As you can see, there's a mention of our meeting we had with them. There's also a way to go see their job runs.
Okay. Well, it strikes me that doing that, I mean, you could take the standard kubeadm install process that would be what you use for bare metal and install it onto VMware hosted VMs, but it wouldn't inherently do things like install Hatchway for volume management. And
so this is
to get that to happen in a CI/CD, somebody would have to write something to cause it to happen, right?
Yeah, this is done through Terraform. So Terraform is being used to run all the test suite. The entire test suite is built around Terraform. So the provisioning portion of the Kubernetes cluster is done through Terraform. So you can see there's a GitLab install where you can actually see the code that's in there.
So Steve, about your distribution question, I think the short term that we'll be looking for is to have just vSphere and Hatchway and just some of the basics in place.
Uh-huh.
And then the next step would be to think about having PKS as a platform. And the comparison here that I would drive at is, they're not actually showing it on this screen, but when we were looking at it, they had GCE, which would just be kind of vanilla Kubernetes on GCE. And then they also had GKE, which would be essentially, PKS or the distribution itself with whatever extra goodies that they have. So I think that it would be great to have both, but the first thing we want is Kubernetes and vSphere vanilla.
Okay. Yeah, because otherwise, in terms of it being useful for testing the cloud provider, I don't think, even with the current one, unless it has Hatchway, it wouldn't serve that purpose.
Yeah, loud and clear.
And the other update I have for this week is about the cloud provider sub-project. I have a PR waiting for approval on the Kubernetes community side to create a Kubernetes enhancement proposal to create a new sub-project under the VMware SIG. So this is going to be the first sub-project that's going to take care of dealing with the cloud provider refactor. So it's the process of moving the cloud provider for vSphere from inside the Kubernetes core 3 to an outside a repo that is managed outside of the Kubernetes core repo. Still on the Kubernetes, still owned and operated by CNCF, but as a separate repo. So once this is approved and merged, we can start working on the actual code and have a document out. There's a link here in the agenda from the previous meeting. I'm gonna just copy paste this here. Just keep current here. And if somebody wants to sign up, there's a document linked here, which is this one. So far, there's 2 of us working on this. If you guys want to sign up to do work on the cloud provider, there's a proposed plan here you can read through and sign up if you want to contribute some work on this. And this is pretty much what I have for today. Are there any questions? All right, going once, going twice. All right, I think we have a demo now. Anthony is gonna do a quick demo for us on kubedrs.
Hey, Fabio, sorry, I was muted. I think the one thing that I wanted to mention is that in the storage SIG that just happened, they reviewed the priority list of getting things out of tree, and saw publicly stated during that SIG that the first priority is to get the cloud providers out, as far as if they have volume plugins. So what he's getting pressure from is that the cloud provider transition, or the cloud providers getting out of tree, is blocked because a bunch of the volume plugins, or a handful of them, require that. And so his #1 item for getting things out of tree is actually the providers that include volume functionality. And so we are on that list. And so aligning to that time frame is going to be important for the target for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aware that there's this sort of a cross dependency between the storage portion of the cloud provider and our work with removing the cloud provider from the Kubernetes tree. Yeah, cool. We're keeping in sync and attending the cloud provider working groups, and now we're gonna start attending the storage SIG because we have to align with them on this.
All right, thanks.
So, Anthony, I think you should be able to share your screen if you want.
Yeah, let me see. How can I share my screen? Let me see. Wait for a sec, sorry. Sure. Okay.
All right, we can see it.
Hey guys, see me on screen?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay. Oh, this blocks my. So today, well, we're going to talk a little bit about this vSphere affinity scheduling plugin. So what it does, it's kind of simple. What it does is it's kind of a hypervisor aware pod affinity and anti-affinity scheduling. To explain why, what it is, I have this little diagram. So Kubernetes scheduler supports anti-affinity and affinity to pods. What it means is, for example, you have two. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You have, for example, you deploy the Kubernetes on top of a vSphere or any other hypervisor. Assume that you have 4 nodes, like I showed here, and those 4 nodes basically running on 2 hosts. So you have P1 on node 1 and P2 on node 3. So when you specify a pod affinity, say I want to deploy pod 3, and I wanted it to be affinity on P1, then what would happen in Kubernetes scheduler is by default it has a host name. It has a host name, the affinity topology. What it means is that Kubernetes default scheduler will put it on node 1. And basically, Kubernetes scheduler doesn't know anything about the physical host. So if you look at it broadly, what the user mean probably is like you need those 2 pods on the same host, but on node 2 it's also the same host, so it's not the valid option. What's more interesting is anti-affinity. For example, you have the same situation and you have P3 you want to deploy, and it's anti-affinity on P1. Then what the user really want is that you they don't want the two pods to be on the same host in case the host dies or whatever happens. You still have some HA, some standby pod working. So what Kubernetes scheduler does is you look at its entity affinity to node 1. So node 2, node 3, node 4 are all valid options. So it's possible that they put on node 2, but that's not really the user wants. So so this is bad choice perhaps. So what we propose here is that we run a vSphere scheduling plugin so that it knows the real host affinity and physical host affinity and affinity. So how it works is like it has two components. One of them is what I call a node updater. It's basically look at vSphere and Kubernetes API scheduler to find the real mapping between the Kubernetes node and the physical host. So after you found that, it will write it into the label, say Alpha CNA VMware /host to host 1. That means the node is running on host 1. And there's a second part is the scheduler extender basically runs the affinity and affinity predicate in that scheduler. So it's optional. So basically, if you have a default scheduler that specify a topology as that key, it can still work. But we'll get it back later. Say why this is also another valid option. So let's start to get some demo. Here I have 4 nodes. So those are 4 nodes, and these are the real hosts that it runs on. So if I look at, first of all, let me show the vSphere environment I have. It's a deployment on the 4 nodes deployment on vSphere, and there's 1 master and 3 slaves. And you can basically see that for the master, it is 21.115, and it runs on this host, and it's correctly captured here. So let's do some deployment. So I have this affinity deployment. So basically, what it says is it's affinity to application labeled as anchor. And if I get pods, so the pods is running on 21.115. So if I create this, so what you can see is that it's not only runs on this host, but runs on the other host, which is on the same node. Yeah, this guy, because it's on the same host. So it's also a valid option. Let's delete the deployment. And try anti-affinity. Basically, anti-affinity is exactly the same, except here, the specific anti-affinity is also applied to anchor pod. So if I create -f demo anti-affinity, then you list all the pods. Oh, they're still terminating. Yeah, basically you see that created containers are running on those 2 hosts, not this one. So this is what it is. I think Kubernetes scheduler have this anti-affinity rule for pods. I think it's but it doesn't have a native support for hypervisor. So I think for VMware vSphere, I think it's a useful extension that the customer might be interested in. And so that's why we developed this extension. Also, let me show you that when what happens when we do a vMotion, right? So so when I list the pods, so this guy is running on, for example, this guy is running on 115, 145. If we remotion it to another host, we'll capture that as well. So let's see. Yeah, this guy. Sorry. We can migrate to another host. Let's see. For example, 126. Yeah, the remotion happens. Then what's happened is this node updater will detect a VM has been migrated to another host, and he will update that this label. And basically, the thing is that the updater doesn't know the node's host name on the Kubernetes side. So what we use is we match the IP address. So what if the node IP address on the Kubernetes side matches the one on the vSphere side, then we assume that they're the same host, same node in Kubernetes. So that requires all the VMs to have VM-Tour installed so that this IP address can be detected from the vSphere side. So it's already done, and we run it again. It should, let me see. You might have some delay. Yeah, basically got the idea. So basically, the plugin will detect what happens underneath and change the label accordingly.
So Anthony, it changes the label, but does it then reschedule the pods to make sure the affinity rules are maintained?
That's a good question. Right now, it doesn't, but we definitely can do something. It's because it revolves the DRS to be able to understand what the host has, and basically the DRS will do compatibility check. And that definitely something that we can do in the future, but right now it's not supported.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So why wouldn't we just use anti-affinity rules in DRS and just only that?
Because what do you mean by anti-affinity rules DRS? I'm sorry.
So I can set on the cluster, I can set anti-affinity rules for the HA proxies and for the masters so that they're on different hosts.
So that means on
that
one
would
host we
control
can run.
those, but not the stuff in pods running on the minion nodes.
Okay, I don't understand why that particularly matters, I guess.
Yeah, so we had this discussion in the last SIG, is that currently the topology is not exposed to kubesscheduler. So even though you would set affinity rules or not, you would still have to tell kubesscheduler which topologies underpin those nodes it sees. And that's why Inferni has this alpha label attached there. We also have a discussion, I think, later, a part of the agenda around the zone support status, which is related to your question.
Yeah.
I think it depends on what you consider to be a fault domain, right? If you consider the guest OS in a node to be a fault domain, then affinity rules will always hold. But if you consider an ESX host to be a fault domain, that's a whole different thing.
We consider ESX to be a fault domain.
Right, right. So in that respect, if you, in a pathological case, if you were to shut down a bunch of ESX hosts and all of your nodes ended up on the same host, that by definition would break affinity for anything that was, sorry, anti-affinity for anything that was defined to be anti-affined. So that's why I had my question about vMotion is important, because if things get vMotioned around, then by definition the pods have to be rescheduled in order to maintain those affinity rules.
Okay, well, the DRS anti-affinity rules are more of a suggestion than a requirement. So if we're doing something like rolling, maintenance mode reboots of hosts, then when it has the necessary number of hosts available to split out the VMs, it will.
Yeah, and in that case, you're fine. Yeah, it's more in the case where you end up with two nodes on the same host. Yeah, if you have a one-to-one mapping between nodes and hosts, you're fine.
Yeah, that's what I was aiming for, was because all of our clusters are at least 3 hosts, and right now the model is 2 HA proxies and three masters. So I can just set one anti-affinity rule for the masters so that they're on 3 different hosts, one anti-affinity rule for the HA proxies so they're on 2 different hosts. Seems rather simple and straightforward, and don't have to mess with a whole bunch of other underlying code and stuff.
Yeah, I found that one of the nodes kind of doesn't work right now because it's running on Nimbus, and it's basically sometimes it's not stable. So it should work.
Yeah, I think that comment, Anthony, some of the outsiders might not know what Nimbus is, but it's a internal test bed, right?
Oh, right.
So Ben, with regards to your question on vMotion and then kind of reconciliation of the state, currently there's the rescheduler, which I think is being deprecated or marked deprecated, but it's meant to be in order to reconcile some of the daemon set and states in Kubernetes, to reconcile after like host failures, etc. So one could use an external controller just to check state. And I'm not sure where a rescheduler is heading, or whether pod priority preemption will take this over later, when Kubernetes scheduler can kind of preempt pods and reschedule them. But I think this will kind of be resolved by the community anyways.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a mechanism to do it, but it's an important an important consideration.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Okay, I'm gonna answer.
Any more questions for Anthony? No.
What's the next step on it, Anthony?
So next step, I think we can try open source this tool, because it's we are running through the process to open source it, so that anyone with the vSphere deployment can potentially use that. And also we're kind of adding, because one of the things that Kubernetes scheduler feels short is the anti-affinity rules performance is not good. And that's also the reason that we choose the option that we provide HTTP extender. Basically, we provide a better performance based on the tree level label selector and those kind of automation that we have. Because in Kubernetes scheduler, there's one issue that you have to go through all the nodes sequentially, and doesn't matter if it's a filtered or not. And it's kind of you also you go through this internal cache that is also linear. So putting them together, it's kind of not performing very well. So one of the things that we can do is better performance, but we need to collect the data for sure. And that's that direction we're heading towards. The bottom line is that we're trying to go through the internal process to open source it so that it can benefit the community.
How does that sound to everybody? Is this going to be a useful kind of first step in getting a connector of vSphere information into the scheduling system for Kubernetes? So everybody interested in that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think so.
And Finley, one more technical question. Is there an option to, like, if there's something wrong with vCenter or with the controller, can you bypass, like, tell Kubernetes scheduler just to bypass in case of error?
No, not yet. But that's that's a good question, and that's also that we're looking at some of the issue to Kubernetes scheduler to be able to bypass it if possible. Basically, right now it can You can't do that. You have to go through the extender.
Oh, okay. So it's not like web admission webhooks where you could tell like if something fails, just pass it through.
It is a webhook XFAE extender. Something fail, it will pass through, but it's not. Then it's for example, it's not about affinity. It doesn't make sense to go through that extender. And right now, the scheduler can do that as far as I know.
Okay.
All right. In the interest of time, I think you should be moving on to the discussion phase. We have 4 items on the agenda today. So first one is current state of backing up persistent volumes with the vSphere cloud provider. This is Michael, and I think this actually ties into the second one, which is scope of documentation around persistent volume backups, which is Ben.
Yeah,
So
Ben,
Michael,
you want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can let Ben go because he knows about the situation and can comment on it anyways. Is that okay, Ben?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm aware of this situation because it was something I looked at about a year ago with the vSphere integrated containers product and how we might consider advising customers to back up block devices that are VMDKs. And I wrote a ton of stuff on that I've linked into the GitHub issue that was raised about this. And I volunteered to add a summary of that documentation to our cloud provider documentation. The only question I had is, well, what should the scope of it be? Number one. And the second one, does someone want to review it? Does someone want to collaborate on it? And maybe a minor one is, where should it go? I mean, it seems like there's a whole menu structure there. I don't know if anyone's opinionated on where it should live.
I'd like to review it and possibly collaborate on it.
Sure. Okay.
I think it should live. We should maybe ask the users where they would think they ought to go when they look for information on this. And I'm guessing, since it's VMware specific, that they might expect to go to the cloud provider. And my second guess would be under storage in some place. The risk of putting it in a generic storage solution is if it doesn't apply to all of it.
Yeah.
Probably should go with our storage plugin, but this in a way is orthogonal to the plugin, right?
There's a suggestion this is issue 302 in VMware/Kubernetes. There's a suggestion to add it in the VMware storage for Kubernetes documentation in GitHub. And then a bunch of places we could link it from. I mean, the suggestion in there seems like a very sensible suggestion, but it's just worth making sure that people agree with it.
Seems reasonable to me.
Okay.
No objections.
Okay. Well, then, Steve, you and I can figure out the scope by ourselves. I think there's some. I think the documentation that I've already created covers just about all of it. It covers what you can back up, what backup solutions work, when you can back up, tools you can use for cloning, restoring, all of these things.
I think this is also something that will eventually come back when we start working on the decoupling of the vSphere cloud provider. So we talked earlier about the need to work with the storage stick in order to extract the storage part of the provider. And I guess that this will require also some sort of enhancement on vSphere, which I guess 6.7 is going to have in terms of having VMDKs or first class disk. I forgot what's the right name for that. So I think there's a path forward to this.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, I was just going to say, I think the most important thing is just explaining in a simple manner why something like Veeam isn't going to be able to back up your volumes in the way that you might expect, why you don't want the lifecycle of your volumes tied to the lifecycle of your pods or your nodes, and what the alternatives are today. We can talk about how it's going to be better tomorrow, but we certainly need to explain why it is the way it is.
Agree, Ben.
Cool. Any more questions or something to add to this specific topic? All right. So let's move on. So third item on the agenda for the discussion today is the current state of the vSphere Cloud Provider credentials and risk mitigation. I think this is something related to hard-coded username and passwords in the configuration file, right? I think this was coming from Michael. There's no name attached to it, but
yeah, I'm sorry. I think this was me, and I think Doug is in the call as well, so he can comment on that. So the reason why I put it in was that this week I had a customer using OpenShift on vSphere, and there was some discussion around, also some deviation between the OpenShift documentation on VCP as well as our documentation. And then the main point there was security concerns of putting plain text passwords and credentials on the nodes. So I followed up internally already with the team maintaining our cloud provider documentation, and I also opened the GitHub issue. So the team promised to update documentation, make it more clear in which Kubernetes version, where credentials have to go on all the nodes or just on the masters, because there's some changes between version 1.8 and 1.9 and things like that. But there was also a question of, can we eventually get rid of putting plain text credentials on the node? And maybe Doug wants to jump in if he's in the call. Doug, you there?
Hey, yeah, I'm here.
Cool.
So I mentioned a little bit on the last call about some of the work that's been going on around this. And most of it so far has just been adding support to Go vMommy to be able to do SAML token authentication. And not just authentication, but actually issuing the tokens and renewing them. So I'll share my screen here real quick. Is that up there? Is this issue up? Can you guys see this? vSphere Cloud Provider SDK authentication.
Yes, we can see it.
So I just created the issue before the meeting. There's still some details to work out, but the content of the issue so far is, basically summarizing. We want an alternative to having the plain text credentials in the config file. So one alternative to that would be a SAML token. But then we also need to think about who's going to be issuing these tokens, at least to handle the case of when they might expire or get revoked. And while I was at it, in this document, I also enumerated all the other vSphere authentication methods. And part of the reason those are worth considering is that SAML token workflow can be a little complex, but also at the end of the day, all of these login methods result in just an HTTP cookie. And then that cookie is passed in the HTTP headers for every other method that is used against the SDK. So potentially, we could look at, well, how could we run some authentication externally to vSphere Cloud Provider and kind of inject the HTTP cookie for all the other method calls. The main issue there is that these sessions can either expire or be removed. So, we wouldn't want to just stop working. We need some way to refresh that. So my next step, other than wrapping up the Go vMommy related work, is to dig into the other cloud providers and take a closer look at what types of authentication they're using and what the configuration parameters are. So GCE is one of the examples, at least, that has the option to authenticate externally. So there's a gcloud, I think it's called CLI tool, where you would kind of log in and create a token externally to the cloud provider itself. So I'm going to go through those and see if there's some workflow that we can borrow, and then continue to update this issue and provide some detail on what our options are.
Yeah, I think the vSphere storage plugin might have use for, well, it certainly needs a credential as well. And I'm wondering if there might be the potential to share it for multiple purposes.
I think the point you were making, Doug, about having like an external helper to work with the authentication part might be maybe the easiest way around this. Might even tie into like the work that we're starting with out of 3 cloud provider.
Yep, definitely. And so that these examples here are of external authentication are using GoVC, but the output for all of these, at least the ones with login-L, is outputting the HTTP cookie, and then the inputs would be the same for any tool that's using the SDK for this type of authentication. So those are mainly meant as examples, and of course, if we do bake some of these workflows into the cloud provider, then this is what the configuration would have to look like as far as having a token and key pair for holder key tokens and so on.
Hey, Doug, what's our commitment for time frame? Like, which version are we trying to get this in by?
I would like to, or planning on getting a PR open for 1.11. But that's, I guess the code freeze is at the end of May, so that's not too far away. But I think it's doable. And then whether or not it's reviewed in time to get merged with 1.11 would be a separate question. But I should be able to at least get it into functional form within the next week or 2.
Okay, cool. How about feedback from anybody else on the call? Is there any part of what you guys heard here that would be a bigger priority to try to limit the scope to get it in for 1.11 versus anything else?
Well, from my side, it comes up a lot in customer conversations. Now, if you look at the other cloud providers, they follow the same procedure, putting plain text secrets or credentials on the nodes. But I think it would be good to have it in the next release and to improve the situation.
Hey, Doug. This is Vladimir. Somebody from Red Hat had reached out to me, and that person ended up opening an issue on Kubernetes website regarding this issue. So since you already have an issue open, maybe it's a good idea to link them or put I'll paste it again in the chat.
Yeah. I had there's one related issue under the VMware Kubernetes.
Right. This one is in Kubernetes itself.
Okay. I looked at it.
I just pasted it again in the chat.
Okay.
So that
cool.
way they'll link and it shows that it's being worked on. I didn't know that there was a.
And I think Tim posted a comment about feature freeze for 1.11, which was yesterday.
Yes.
I think on the storage SIG, Saad said that they are still squeezing a couple things in last second. Steve or team, what do you guys think? Do you think we can try to get this squeezed in as well into that window?
I think maybe we can. I was in the community meeting today, and I think I heard them comment that it was passed, but there might be exceptions made. I think if we were going to get it squeezed in, we've got at most 24 hours, though, to try it.
Yeah.
There is a formal exception process.
Does that apply to cloud provider functionality too, or is that more higher level features?
Everything. It's a feature. If it's a feature, yeah, it applies.
Okay.
So who can help Doug on that exception process?
It starts with the SIG leads.
Yeah, I guess I've never done it before, but I've got to learn sometime. So I'll help.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
So, yeah, the one point I would say is to have an issue, a feature issue. That's the starting point.
I think we should start by classifying this, if it's a feature or not.
Right.
And like start from there. If it's considered a feature, then yes, absolutely. I
Yeah,
will
so
still argue that this might be
feature or
just
bug. What's the ruling? I guess we should.
Well, I mean, if it's fixing something that's broken, then it's a bug. If it's introducing new functionality, then it should be considered a feature.
So Michael observed that all or most of the other cloud providers do it as well. So pretty hard to classify as a bug, I'd say, but whatever, even if it is a feature, let's try to get it in.
Yeah, it sounds like this is a feature.
And if not, it's going to be 112.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. Assuming, it won't be completely rejected, that if we don't get 111, then we'll just carry it forward to 112.
Okay, sounds like we've got a plan. I'll work with you and Doug and see what we can do to get it in the next release.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any more questions on this topic here? Anyone wants to add something? We're almost close to the top of the hour. I just want to touch briefly on the last item we have on the discussion list, which is status update on how the progress with zone support in vSphere Cloud Provider. I think we talked about this at last meeting. So I think there's currently no support for availability zones because there's no clear understanding of what a zone should be looking like in vSphere. So vSphere has various concepts of fault domains and potentially availability zones, but I guess that this could be mainly driven by storage fault domains, given that most of the people working on a cloud provider were storage focused. So I think this is still an ongoing discussion. I think this might be something that might require some effort from the SIG in trying to figure out what would be the best way to formalize what is an availability zone looking like in a vSphere environment. Is that a data center? Is that a cluster? Is that a resource folder? I guess we don't have a clear answer on that right now. This might require some...
Yeah, Fabio, that
Go
my
ahead.
name is always not there. Yeah, no, you put it well. I was just not clear on the decision that we made in the last call. How are we going to progress on this? And I think it's good that we should first define what like an availability zone or what our topology would be. And Fernie's work on the kubedrs could be a viable option for vanilla Kubernetes deployments. For example, OpenShift enterprise users, which maybe don't want to extend or work around some of this stuff, they, I think, would prefer to have it in the cloud provider. So we should have a plan to make it part of the cloud provider, at least have the core functionality there and then extend by the kubedrs work from Fernie.
Yeah, absolutely. Since Anthony is on the call, I mean, this would be like more of trying to formalize a plan on defining what the availability zone is on vSphere. So I'm not sure, given that Anthony has some background and has done some work on the affinity and anti-affinity, maybe he has more insight on what we should be doing. I think the best way to go forward here is to make a proposal and then iterate over that proposal. And once we finalize that, we make that part of a plan. Given that we're starting to work on a cloud provider, I think that will be part of the cloud provider refactoring. It's still going to be a different it's going to be different work stream, because this is more like adding a new feature to the cloud provider instead of refactoring the work. But given that we're going to work on the refactor is going to happen out of 3, and then as the very last step, we're going to move out the code from the cloud provider that is sitting in tree currently. We can keep the 2 work stream in parallel, and continue to contribute features and new things to Kubernetes core, and then once we're ready, then migrate everything over. So I don't want to volunteer anybody, but Anthony, if you're still on the call, I'm not sure if you want to take on this, or it's better if we just try to work that on the mailing list.
Sure. I mean, especially when vSphere, not just the vSphere on-premise, there's also vSphere on AWS. And
you're right.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense, like, to put on a plan, like how to deal with that in public.
Okay, so can I sign you up for coming up with a plan on defining what the vSphere AZ is going to be like?
Yeah, I'll work with Michael on that.
Yes, please. Happy to review. Yeah, thank you, Anthony.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool, very good. All right. We still have a few more minutes for Q&A. If there's any outstanding question from today, now it's time to bring it up.
Not exactly a question, but I've got one thing I'd like to bring up, carried over from last week. We're still interested in getting somebody from the user community involved as a chair of this SIG. I see we may have a couple new visitors here. And if somebody's got the time to commit to this and to participate in this SIG as a user representative, please reach out to myself or Fabio, and we're looking for a co-chair.
Yeah, good point, Steve. All right.
Just one clarification on Vlad. The issue links that you posted in chat are related to the volume backup. Not the issue I posted is related to authentication credentials.
Okay. I think I posted your issue on the chat, maybe somewhere.
The other thing going forward in these meetings, if people can do Fabio and I a favor, I believe that anything posted in that chat goes away as soon as the Zoom ends. And I've had the experience as a non-moderator where I wanted to go grab one of those before the meeting ended, and once that Zoom is closed, you can't get it anymore. So pasting those things in the agenda notes doc might be a notch better.
Yeah, I think we can actually download that from the Zoom website. I'm gonna see if we can get a hold of the previous ones and post them on a meeting doc. Okay, we still have 3 minutes to go. If somebody has anything else want to cover.
So yeah, I'm Bryson Shepard. I'm with Walmart Labs. So we are part of that user base. The I think is it Steve?
Yes.
That you were talking about. So one of the things I saw today in the demo was he talked about like a standard of like four nodes on VMware. Is that kind of like a standard that you guys have been following, or like what's the kind of
by nodes you mean ESX hosts, or are you talking?
No, I'm talking about
Kubernetes sense.
Kubernetes. So he listed 2 vHosts and 4 nodes, so a master and 3 workers.
I don't see any reason, Anthony, if you're still there, maybe you can speak on this, but I don't see any reason why there'd be a requirement for 4. You do not want enough for a consensus, so I would think production level you'd want 3. I don't see anything that would result in a need for 4, but I could be missing something.
Right, it's basically a minimal.
That's the minimum, right? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, it's a minimum that you can demo the idea. Basically, it's not for any production use. It's a kind of a single master, 3 slaves. It's not ideal for any kind of production use, but it's kind of a for demo purpose. Like this is a minimal machine that I need to demonstrate the idea. So
is there kind of like a good a good standard minimal production setup that's recommended?
I mean, to my understanding, that's you at least need 2 masters to be HA, which is each other. Like a single master is failed, then it's gonna be you lost your everything, the control plane.
Yeah, and right. I think this question is more Kubernetes generic rather than anything.
Well, so it comes back to the VMware stuff. So it goes back to his idea of the 2 vhosts. So if you've got the 2 vhosts, if you've got two masters, to your point, yeah, you lose the 1 master and that's gone. But if you've got really, if you're not doing 1 master, you're going to do 3 masters. But if you do 3 masters, you end up with 2 of those on one of those 1 vhost, and you lose that vhost.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So basically, I need to have some kind of anti-affinity rule set to the master node. Not just a master node, it's like the important parts that you have in a cluster.
Hey, we've got several clusters where we have two vhosts, and so we're in that situation. And so I'm just trying to understand the best. We were talking about the anti-infinity stuff. How when you're vmotioning between the masters between the vhosts, are you seeing any latency issues? Kubernetes latency issues?
The environment I use is like a testing purpose, so it's not a very powerful machine. It's like shared nested machine. So the experience I have is not probably what you see in your cluster, but I've seen other people doing this in other environments. I think it should work fine in terms of latency.
So one thing that we're finding is at about the same time every day, about when we're doing VMware snapshots, we're getting Kubernetes latency from the API server. And so how are people snapshotting those VMs, or are they not snapshotting them? Maybe specifically the master nodes.
I don't think there's anything inherent in the product that we ship that would cause these nodes to be snapshotted. But it could be that if you've got a backup solution in play, it automatically attempts to back up VMs, which...
Yeah, it is automatically backing them up. I'm just wondering, like, so we're discussing just disabling the snapshots.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like the data you really want, that you care about, is the master and your etcd data, right? The nodes really should be ephemeral, and if there shouldn't be any reason. It wouldn't really make sense to restore a node necessarily, because if you were to do that, it might have all sorts of stale state that the etcd actually isn't
right.
etcd. So I mean, instinctively, it feels like backing up nodes, worker nodes, isn't best practice, but absolutely backing up the master and the etcd would be.
Yeah, and even then, I don't know about, say, a 3-node quorum of etcd. an attempt to restore one of the three and roll it back a couple days, I think is a recipe for having something blow up in your face.
Yeah,
so I'm
so
not
that's
even sure that that's a great idea.
yeah. So we were talking about. I don't even know if we want to back up or do snapshots of the masters. If we're looking at ARC backups for etcd. So if we've got our etcd backed up, I guess our reason of looking at the masters is it might be faster if there's a snapshot. If there were to be, no, I actually don't have a reason why I would do that. Like if there was a total disaster at the site and both vhosts were gone, we'd still have to rebuild.
Yeah. You know what? We're going over our time for the SIG meeting, but this seems like a great opportunity for us to write a blog on best practices for how you'd go about doing this. And of course, putting it in docs would be good too. But I'm going to go out here and volunteer to work on this blog. Maybe Anthony and some engineering resources could get involved. And rather than go out there and guess about what the behavior is, this might even involve actually doing some tests. And if you'd like, we could run this by you, Bryson, and get a user perspective on whether this really answers all the questions you've got and explains what's going on here.
Yeah, I'd definitely work on that with you.
Okay.
We're definitely hitting some specific issues right now. So
yeah, this space is so new that a lot of the things you run into, like this issue, are new to everyone involved. And sometimes you run across docs out there that were written a year ago, and the sell-by date on some of these blogs ought to be 3 months at best because of the way things change. But okay, I'll volunteer to get involved and get something going on figuring out what's going on here and getting it documented and maybe written up in a blog.
Bryson, with respect to the number of nodes question, if you have 2 vhosts, you've got to consider a node running on the vhost to be its own fault domain, even if it's like a nested fault domain. So it would make sense to me to have more than one Kubernetes node running on a single vhost, because if you have to drain one of those nodes, if you have to upgrade one of those nodes, if something panics the kernel in one of those nodes, then you've got a backup on that vhost. So running 2 nodes per vhost and having a total of 4 nodes may make a lot of sense. I mean that may be a good way to run. So
yeah, right now we're looking at we have 3 master nodes and 4 worker nodes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we're trying to, split up those masters, but you always end up with 2 on one,
right?
And 1, and so if the wrong vhost goes down,
yeah, you lose too much.
You lose your quorum.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing some testing on that right now too. Our thought is that if that goes down, the one etcd should be things will still be going. We won't be scheduled, but I want to see how vMotion will work to move those other VMs over,
mm-hmm.
and then will quorum be, brought back up once those are over.
Right. Good question.
Guys, in the interest of time, given that we're 6 minutes over, I think I'm gonna wrap up. And but I will definitely want to keep you guys engaged, and let's use Slack to connect over this. And Steve, you volunteered to write a blog post, so maybe you can follow up with Bryson on this.
Okay, I will. I might not get back to you. I'm going off to KubeCon Copenhagen, so that's going to keep me busy. But I'll get back to you within a time frame of, call it a week and a half, 2 weeks, something like that.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Wrapping up for today's meeting. I'll see you guys next time.
Bye,
Have a
everybody.
good rest of the week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
So we're like